What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about rFactor 2 because now is a very good time to be talking about rFactor 2. Anyways, the catalyst for this video is the amount of changes since the beginning of 2015, and I really will sum it up as this. I think 2015 could be for ISI what 2014 was for Simbin and Sector 3 Studios, which is Simbin, but it's not. You know, which, if you're not sure what I mean, in 2014, Race Room Racing Experience by Simbin was terrible. Garbage. Junk. Not worth playing. And then Sector 3 came along from the proverbial ashes of Simbin and actually made some improvements and actually turned that from something that was pretty much useless to something that actually has a purpose and actually does things very well and is quite competent at what it does. Here in 2015, I foresee ISI doing a similar act with rFactor 2, as I think the writing's on the wall that rFactor 2 is starting to mature and become a less bipolar racing sim and a more complete level-headed experience within sim racing. To me, rFactor 2, when it's been good, when it's been firing on all cylinders, it is the best sim out there, in my opinion. When it's on its best behavior. Now, keep in mind, it's not often on its best behavior. Often you have to deal with the rFactor 2 part of rFactor 2 to enjoy rFactor 2, if that makes any sense. But over the last couple of months, since the beginning of 2015, we've already seen some of the most tangible, obvious, can't miss them changes to rFactor 2, which really makes me say, I think they're starting to figure it out, as well as rFactor 2 being as good as it is when it is as good as it can be. It should be on everyone's radar, and it's good to kind of bring it up and say, hey, yeah, that sim that you might be making jokes about, it's starting to mature, and you should probably be scared if you're an rFactor 2 basher, because this thing can be pretty dang good. Can be. So, anyways, let's start talking about some of those changes. Since the beginning of the new year, we've seen the awful, terrible, should have never been released, nobody should have ever been subjected to the terror that is the poop brown user interface that was terrible. And that's been replaced with something that's more clean, slick looking, more usable. It's orange, gray, white, rFactor colors, not brown. And you know what? It's a significant improvement. That alone is probably my favorite change that I've seen within rFactor 2 since its initial release, because it's so much better to fire up rFactor 2 and not be greeted with a poop brown user interface that's in a low resolution and looks like crap. I mean, seriously, it's a big change. I'm not even lying. It just puts you in such a better mood. It's one of those psychological things or something like that. So yeah. There's also been, in the most recent updates, finally, HDR in-car, in closed cockpit cars, now actually somewhat functions properly. Previously, if you drove a closed cockpit car with HDR enabled, well, the whole sky was basically overexposed to a massive degree, and colors were distorted, and the exposure entirely messed up, and yeah, which was a pretty major problem. Finally fixed. Night lighting for night racing, which is one of rFactor 2's big key features within the current sim racing environment. I think it's one of those selling points for rFactor 2. With the most recent update, they actually made some changes to make it more workable, more manageable, improve the experience, which is something that really needed to happen. Beforehand, night racing was something that was possible in rFactor 2 from a feature standpoint, but from a usability and quality experience, personally, I would say there are very few times where I've gone out of my way to enjoy a night race within rFactor 2, even though I really like night racing, and I think it's incredibly cool to have a 24-hour time cycle and things like that, but it was that poorly implemented. Now, it's a little bit better. Sticking along with the graphical theme, we'll talk about the physics. There have been some physics changes and improvements that we've gotten our first bite of fairly recently. We'll talk about that later. Yes, we will. But there's also a new tone mapper at work now, which maybe is the reason why the HDR and the closed cockpit cars now works, or maybe not. I personally don't know and don't really care about the wizardry and black magic that's going on behind the scenes. All you need to know is rFactor 2 no longer suffers nearly as bad from the toxic grass syndrome, or TGS. Previously, TGS heavily affected rFactor 2, especially in many of the lower quality third-party tracks that were out there, as well as some of the older tracks from ISI that haven't been updated to its most recent specification, whereas now, in many cases, TGS has been toned down to a more acceptable level. No, this change isn't going to make rFactor 2 a beauty queen that's going to win all these graphical awards from all the gaming magazines out there, but it really does go a long way, even though it's a little change. As a racing sim, the focus is on the physics, the car, the track, the environment, the interaction of all that, and the racing being simulated. The graphics are just there as an interface between you and the physics, more or less, and the action going on the track. So it doesn't need to be an absolutely stunning looking game. It just needs to be a game that looks semi-competent, at least competent enough that it's not constantly screaming out to you that it looks so unbelievably bad. Which really, these changes, within the HDR as well as the tone mapper, have made rFactor 2 a less frustrating experience. Not that I particularly care that much about the graphics, or that it's that big of an improvement to the overall experience, but it does make it more level and even-keeled to the point where now you can start to really focus in on what really matters, which is the physics. So anyways, on to the physics, and here we're going to be doing a little bit of speculation and extrapolation as things are going to be changing, and we currently have a very limited sample size, but this is something that can be quite large and important to rFactor 2, and that is the updated contact patch model, which is a new contact patch modeling. That it's really self-explanatory title right there, but currently this is only available in the carts, which were updated just a couple of days ago. And well, to sort of explain why I think this is going to be a very big feature within rFactor 2 and something that's going to play out over the next coming months and years of this game's development and really define rFactor 2 even more precisely than what it already is. I'd like to talk about some of the cars that I don't like in rFactor 2, and there are a lot of cars that I don't like in rFactor 2. Believe me, there's probably actually more cars I don't like in rFactor 2 than cars I do like in rFactor 2. And the common theme with a lot of those cars are rear end grip and the way it's presented, I will say. It's not that there's no rear grip. It's not that you're constantly fishtailing and sliding around like a crazy madman drift car or anything like that. But rather, it feels distinctively like you're driving a car with absolutely crazy suspension geometry and camber in particular. And this is something that the contact patch model update is supposed to tweak and improve the accuracy of. But really, the best way I can describe some of those cars in rFactor 2 is it feels like the tire is being severely underutilized. It really does make me think of one of those stanced out cars that's been slammed to the ground and are running like crazy ridiculous camber because to the guy who owns the car, it looks really cool. But of course, the contact patch on that tire, the part of the tire that contacts the ground, which is basically all of your control over the car, because after all, it's the only thing that's actually touching the ground. It's all going through that one little patch, which is under a tremendous amount of stress because it's bearing such a load and it's not evenly distributed across the face of the tire, which that's something that's been an issue. It's been a known issue with rFactor 2's physics and the tires within rFactor 2, and this contact patch model update, while by no means perfect already or anything like that, ISI themselves have said there's still work to be done on this. It's a step in the right direction, I feel, because with the carts, they've changed. They're the same, but different. Notably different, but very similar. There wasn't a radical giant change, however, what is a change that I think is going to carry over to a lot of the cars, and I think is going to improve the issue that I just talked about. You know, actually the new updated karts slide around a lot more. In that sense, they're more difficult to drive. However, at the same time, they don't slide as quickly, as fastly. You know, they don't suddenly just go away and you're gone. You can actually get up on the wheel and drive these things and wheel them around the circuit now, which previously, if you did that with the older version of the karts, you would either get stuck into a very lazy spin, or alternatively you would just bog the engine down and you'd go absolutely nowhere because, well, the way the physics were working plus the engine, and well, karts doing that because they are karts, and that's a thing that they do if you don't get enough revs into them. You know, but it's really changed the driving dynamics of the kart, although it's still very similar and it's still distinctly a kart. So I'm interested to see how that plays out with the other cars, because I think really the main issue with the cars I do have issues with in rFactor 2, the physics issues can be traced down to just the way the rear of the car ends up actually working, which this update very well could actually end up pretty much fixing all of that. Hopefully, in theory. In theory, it's supposed to. So really, I'm quite excited to see this play out over the coming months and years of rFactor 2's ongoing development, because this could very well change things, and with what they already have. You know, for example, this is the only sim where I actually willingly, knowingly choose to drive front-wheel drive cars because I actually find them fun. Yeah. You know, for example, when I take the Honda Civic BTCC car, I was not expecting to like that car at all, and it's actually one of my favorite cars in rFactor 2. You know, easily. You know, I fire up Race Room Racing Experience, which has the same version of the car, you know, the same car, and it's just all like, this sucks. This is a front-wheel drive touring car. I want to go drive the other front-wheel drive touring car, which is the exact same thing, and that's way better. You know, the simple pleasure that is driving something like the Clio around, you know, Lime Rock Park, and you go through the uphill chicane and you just bang into that first curb on that uphill, that right-hander, and you feel the car go up the curb, you feel the suspension load up and everything, and it's just fantastic. And it just feels more immersive, more dynamic, more tangible than in any other sim that I've played. There's a heck of a lot of potential. It's already really good at times, sometimes not so good, but if this contact patch model update does what I'm hoping it does over the long run, and when things are updated to take advantage of this, yeah, look out for rFactor 2. It's coming fast, and it's already got a lot of potential. I think that's the theme of this video. So really, I still have one big question with rFactor 2, and whether or not 2015 is going to be a landmark year for rFactor 2, and that is the question of content. The same question that has always existed with rFactor 2, and that is, can ISI produce enough content with enough quality, with enough quantity, to make rFactor 2 more relevant and win more drivers over? Because right now, whenever I fire up rFactor 2, it's just totally random. There's so much random stuff. You know, for example, cool, there's a GT2 car. Cool, there's a BTCC car. Cool, there's an open wheel car, you know, or 4, you know. There's a lot of different types of cars represented within rFactor 2. There's a lot of different types of tracks represented with rFactor 2. However, it still feels like it's just a general sample platter, and there's nothing truly substantial there. There's nothing that makes me say this can be an identity within rFactor 2. Hopefully this will change over the course of the coming year, as ISI have announced that they've been working on stock cars for a while actually, and they're going to be implementing rules to support stock car racing. Hopefully we will see some, you know, really good high quality tracks and a decent number, as well as the stock cars to race on them. And we'll see that all released at one time in one big, massive, hey, you have to try this if you are a sim racer type of update that we've seen from almost every other sim. Because really, with the carts that they released previously, the carts were fantastic, the carts were amazing, but they were released at a time when there was only one karting circuit to support those karts. And because of that, it ended up being something that was sort of a flash in the pan. People played it, they enjoyed it, they liked it a lot, but they got tired of racing on the same exact track forever and ever and ever and ever, as well as there weren't a whole heck of a lot of very, very good, high-quality tracks from the third-party mod community to race those on. You know, it's something where rFactor 2 has started to really assemble the pieces of the puzzle, but it sort of needs that binding agent, and the content is that binding agent, if that makes any sense. I really think, though, that if ISI can produce enough content and enough quality to answer that question, I really think, though, that the pieces have started to come together in a more mature state, that then you will start to see the mod community take off, and you'll start to see more people taking rFactor 2 more seriously rather than trying to use rFactor 2 as a butt of a joke whenever need be. So, yeah, rFactor 2, it should be on your radar. There's been a lot of change over the last couple of months, and it's all been pretty dang positive, and I think rFactor 2 is really starting to put the pieces together, and it's been no doubt that the potential is there. It's just a question of when will it actually reach that potential, and it seems to be that now is about the time it's starting to come good on that potential. So, pay attention to rFactor 2. Watch this space, more or less. Hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.